I've written a book, Tyrkjaránið. That is the Swedish name, this famous event, 1627. And you probably recognize where the picture is taken. Maybe some heavy rocks on the back as well. It's just that that boat there, it wasn't there when the picture was taken. Makes it a bit more exciting. Okay. My name is Mats Streuter, as I said there. And I learned to sail during this time as well, which was good, because then I got to sail in terminology right before. I have a boat now in Lake Vänern. That's the largest lake in Europe outside Russia, in the middle of Sweden. So I sailed around there. They have a few thousand islands as well, so it's a nice place to sail. And that was, so I have a better understanding now. Perhaps I wouldn't have started to write this book if I had started to sail first, because then I would have understood how difficult the trip would be. Because this is a trip about a man who sails in a small boat after the Crusades, North Africa. And I'm originally an engineering physicist from Göteborg, west coast of Sweden. And I worked with product development for many years in Sweden, South Africa, Australia. Development both in telecommunication, cables, radar, rock drill rig, welding machines, all different kind of things I've developed for. But then I started to understand now that, start to think that there were books that had to be written. So I felt the responsibility to write the books that no one else wrote. So I had to work less with the things I work with, and start writing books. And because I have more about me is that my interest in herpetology is shown in my books as well. Reptiles and amphibians. There are not so many in Iceland, as you know, but they are in Africa. And so I have the reason for writing books is that there's normally one side to the story that media focuses on. But in the real world, there's more than one side to the story. So if you, for example, as you know, slavery was abolished late in Africa. They came, but you still only focus on the transatlantic slave trade that normally took place in the United States. That seems to be the main focus. Everyone knows about that. The black people who worked on the cotton plantations in the southern states in the United States. But in Morocco, for example, slavery was only abolished in the 1930s. When I approached the Sultan there in the 1880s, and said that you have to abolish slavery, he didn't really understand what they were talking about. I thought the idea was very strange. So, and also the other thing is that I write books about with a different perspective. My first book was in Nicaragua, was about discrimination of white people after apartheid in South Africa. Everyone knows that apartheid discriminated black people, but not so many knows what has happened after apartheid. That was the first book. I thought no one wrote about that, so I had to write a book about that. And particularly in this book, is that slavery, as you can see, that can affect anyone if they're not lucky. And also the reason was that it happened in a Nordic country with a culture similar to Sweden. And when I started to look into this, I noticed also that there were some people, even affected Swedish sailors, for example, that were taking slaves in the Mediterranean. And so I came across this event by coincidence. It was mentioned in a historical magazine in Sweden. And since I always try to get up with another perspective, I had two choices then. What would be the next book after the South African book? I thought this was one alternative, and the other alternative was I was thinking about was they talk about men's violence against women. So I thought perhaps I should write about women's violence against men. So that was also an alternative to me. But when I checked around, I thought there would be greater interest in this book about the Turkish raid. So I decided to write that first, anyway. So it became my second novel. And but I had to understand it then. What was written, what was understood about this. And the interesting thing there was a book written about this event a long time ago, by Olafur Egerson. And when I was thinking about this 2014, I could see that there was an English translation of this book. So I ordered it, borrowed it at Uppsala University Library. Is that a copy? And I copied that copy as I had it. Because I wasn't able to buy the book at that time, it was sold out. So when a new book came, 2016, I bought that immediately there. Because it was easy to read from the book, I thought. I'll find everything. So the preparations for this was that I also had to come to Heimea. I was here in September 2014. Then I brought a car and traveled around. Så det satt var stor hluti and tried to understand where the Turks landed. And also having an idea about the spectacular cliffs around where the people were trying to hide from the Turkish slave raiders. And also I read about, I had a warning from the Grindavik attack. I have even more understanding after I read these Northern Captives and Stolen Lives, but they were not available when I wrote my novel. Because they knew that there would be slave traders that came here, they were warned about that. They didn't know about that in Grindavik. They thought that was just like the English that came a few years before, just taking goods. But here they were actually taking people. So that was a shock in Grindavik, I understand now. But here they knew about that risk that they would be brought as slaves. So they were desperately trying to get away when the Turks came. So then I knew that the Turks were different to the English criminals. They were taking people, not only goods. So the preparation was I came here, understood what the island looked like, and I went up a bit up by Heimaklettur there, but I understand there were some other rocks that were even more difficult to climb, that they were hiding. And I went to the Vasa Museum. That was a unique place, because this boat is contemporary, basically, to the boats that corsairs used. This thing sank on this Virgin tour in 1628. So it was very interesting to be there. And I'm sorry about this, I just want to have everything. Vasa Museum, they also had the feeling, you had the feeling for the whole ship. It's unique. And it is unique because you don't have the sea worms in the Baltic Sea. If you come out on the west coast in Sweden, there are no preserved ships because they're eaten by the sea worms. So in the Baltic Sea, you have a number of preserved ships. But it's an extreme project to bring everything up to the surface like that. So it's a museum, and it's quite a large ship. It was brought up in 1961, I think. And then it has become a museum, and all the artifacts, you can see, walk around there and see all the porcelain and everything else that is preserved from that time, that they used during the, so you get a good feeling, but it was incorrectly designed ship. You might have heard about it, that it toppled over because center of gravity wasn't correctly placed on the ship. And so I recommend the Vasa Museum if you go to Stockholm. Then you have a feeling for that kind of ship. And it's unique. You don't find a ship anywhere else in the world that is that old. I also read some literature. The main literature that I want to point out is that I want to understand the concept here of slavery. So I read large 3-volume books by Nick Harrison about slavery. It takes care of everything from Babylon, 500 BC, to Lebanon in the 1990s. It's been a long sad story of slavery. So I could understand the context of my particular book. And also read this Tinnes Wood that specializes in Pirates of Barbary. And of course I had Olafur Egilsson's book. This is I think this is the issue from 2016 you see here. Yes, in notes here. They recognize all the different issues. Yes. And afterwards I have received the latest issue as well from Cosmori, who came to send me from. And also I had an idea from Olafur Egilsson as well, because there were some letters that were sent back. So in one of my chapters, the new priest, he reads aloud some letters from the captives in the church, and then try to get some help, some ransom money collected in the church as well, because they're desperate to free their relatives there. And they also hear about some people being killed and dying on the ships, for example. So I got an idea there about the letters, so I've introduced that into my novel as well. And this is what basically is said on the back of the text on the back. We are following a man, Arman, who is hiding on top of one of the rocks here, rock. And he looks down and he sees that his 2 little sons are killed by the Turks because they're used as too small. And his wife and daughter, of more interest, are brought with to slavery in North Africa. And then, half of the house was burnt down, so he shares a house, then his house, with another couple who has had their house burnt down. He's a sheep farmer, but he has been out sailing a lot, and when he was a kid, he borrows a boat from his friend Bjorn, who he shares with, and Bjorn takes care of the sheep while he's away. in my book. And so because he decides then to pull himself together, he has to do this. He can't just stay and wait. So he prepares a small boat and sails after the corsairs south. He doesn't really know from the beginning where he's going. He decides to follow the ship. They are, of course, far ahead, so he doesn't find them on the way. Verisimilitude. It's an interesting concept. That's one I came across when I studied theoretical philosophy. So what is true? What is not true? It is, it's a fictional story. It's based on a real event. I'm trying to stay as close to the historical event as I know. Most people are inventing in this. And I have Olaf Regelson mentioned in my book as well. He's one of the ships, in one of the ships. So he's a peripheral figure in my novel here, more, I would say. And the way I understood it at that time was that Murad Reis was on the Algerian ships, because the way I understood it was that he had moved his whole operation to Algeria in 1627, and to be able to do that, he had to be on these ships. But there are other thoughts about that, I understand that. And so the only real characters in my book are Murad and Olafur. But the interesting thing about writing an historical novel is that there's so many things you have to understand. It's, for example, I thought that he was going to miss the northern lights, the green lights, etc. But then I realized at that time, about 100 years, there was no solar activity. So they wouldn't have seen much northern lights during his lifetime. The little things like that is interesting when you write historical novels, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And also have to try to understand the borders of the time. And the route is slightly different. This is the map from Stolen Lives, I think, from that was sent by Adam Nichols here. And this is the traditional Corsair route. I didn't have that map at the time when I wrote my book. So Arman followed this route. He went straight through down there. So it was a very dangerous route, I understand now. He passed the rock wall. It's a great granite rock in the middle of Atlantic, northwest of Ireland. And then I went into Ireland all the way. And it's also interesting when you have to meet different people and understand that they're not able to communicate with each other. So there had to be lots of body language in the book when they're talking. Because they spoke totally different languages. And he also went into the coast of West Africa, Western France, Bretagne, and into the Bay of Biscay. And there was, in the 1600s, there was a sand, also interesting, because there was a sandy island there in the Bay of Biscay. It doesn't exist anymore, because the sand has moved inland and become part of the beach. So, and you also have to learn, he came to Lisbon, and Lisbon, it was a major point there, because then he met some Swedish sailors that had been freed. And they said that he should search in Algiers. It's probably in Algiers. Most are taken to Algiers. So the likelihood is that they will be there. And Lisbon, I also had to understand how it was then. It was also before the earthquake. of 1755. Have I talked too much? No. Earthquake of 1755. Then you think, what will happen? Will you reach Algiers? Will you find Björk and Brunhilde? And you have to read a book and find out about that. This is said about the book. This is a professor in history at Lund University who enjoyed the book, and he also said that he wrote in Swedish, but I translated into English here. Basically, what he said that he thought it was a very important book, because this is an event that basically no one knows about in Sweden. So I thought it was very good that they had written it, so more people get to know about the event. And he is the most well-known historian in Sweden. Basically, he's the one who wrote these 3 volumes about slavery. He has written about 100 books, besides his full-time professorship at Lund University. And he's very active in journals, TV and radio, etc. as well, so he probably doesn't sleep much. Okay. I thought perhaps I should read a short piece as well from the book. If you start, the book starts just after the raid. I thought actually first to have the raids included. First version I wrote was the raids included. First I came to the Eastern Fjords, and then they came into Heima. And I had the raids described, but then I cut out, then I planted it in their memories instead. So when the 2 women, for example, Björk from Heima, och Frida from the Eastern Fjords, they talk on the boat together, and then they discuss what happened to them. And then you find out anyway what had happened. Frida had also children killed, for example, and they were disconnected from her husband, and they don't really know what had happened to them. And okay, I read first then in Swedish, then I read my English translation. This is how the book starts. Arman hade inte kunnat sova sedan den gruvliga händelsen. När han slöt ögonen blandades piraternas vrål med skriken hos dem som brändes inne. Det hade gått en vecka sedan den ödesdigra dagen då korsarerna anföll. Efter det var ingen saliv på hemmen. Högar av färsk jord hade kastats över varje grav, och små träkors var hopspikade och nedstuckna i marken. De som fanns kvar på ön hade svåra samvetskval för att de fortfarande levde, och dessutom själva hade lyckats undgå att bli förslavade. In English, Arman had not been able to sleep since that dreadful event. When he closed his eyes, the roars of the pirates were mixed with the screams of the people being burnt alive in their homes. 1 week had passed since the fatal day when the corsairs attacked. Mounds of fresh soil had been piled on each grave, and small wooden crosses had been nailed together and pushed into the ground. The people remained on the island, suffered from severe qualms of conscience for still being alive, and on top of that, had evaded slavery.